Part 1. The Kensington house was made for parties. Its high ceilings caught laughter and spun it around the glittering chandeliers. The polished marble floors mirrored the smiles of well-dressed guests. But the true heart of the house, especially on a night like this, was the piano dot. It was a grand piano, a beast of glossy black wood that sat in the corner of the main living room. Its surface shone like a deep, still lake under the lights. It wasn't just furniture. It was a symbol. It said the Kensingtons were people of taste, of culture. Tonight, the house was full because of Chloe Kensington. Chloe was 17, and this party was a celebration of her latest achievement, a top prize at a prestigious regional music competition. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Kensington, moved through the crowd with proud smiles. Mr. Kensington talked loudly about investments, but his chest puffed up a little more when someone mentioned his daughter's talent. Mrs. Kensington adjusted a perfectly arranged flower vase. Making sure everything looked just right, Chloe stood by the piano, surrounded by her friends from the Oak Ridge Music Academy. They were all like her, polished, confident, dressed in clothes that looked casual, but cost more than most people's monthly rent. There was a boy with carefully messy hair who played jazz guitar, a girl with a sharp smile who was a brilliant violinist. They were a circle of talent, and they knew it. The party had a soundtrack, and they were providing it. One by one, they took turns at the piano. Chloe went first, playing a lively piece by Chopin. Her fingers flew across the keys, fast and precise. The guests nearby clapped warmly. Then her friend, the jazz guitarist, sat down and played a cool, complicated tune, his head nodding to a rhythm only he could hear. Each performance was met with appreciative murmurs. So gifted, an older woman whispered. "The future of music is in good hands," a man said to Mr. Kensington, who nodded in agreement. Through all this, like a quiet shadow, moved Elena. Elena was the Kensingtons' maid. She was in her late 40s, with lines around her eyes that spoke more of tiredness than age. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, neat bun. She wore a plain, dark dress with a white apron over it, a uniform that made her blend into the background of the luxurious house. She carried a large silver tray, moving from group to group, collecting empty champagne flutes and offering fresh ones. She said very little, a soft "pardon me" or a barely audible "thank you." Most guests didn't even look at her. They just took a new glass from her tray as if it were offered by a ghost, but her eyes were active. They watched the room, anticipating an empty plate, a guest looking for a napkin. And sometimes, just for a second, her gaze would settle on the piano, not on the performer, but on the instrument itself, on the curve of its wood, on the way the light hit the ivory keys. When Chloe's friend played a particularly beautiful chord, Alana's hands, holding the heavy tray, went very still for just a moment. Then she would blink and move on, her face returning to its calm, empty expression. Chloe's friend Mark noticed. Mark was the kind of boy who found boredom in everything and thought amusement was his right. He had a clever, mean smile. He was a decent cellist, but a much better social player. He nudged Chloe while Elena was clearing a plate from a table near them. "Check out the help," he whispered, his voice low so only their circle could hear. "She's totally staring at the piano. Every time someone plays, she freezes. Think she's a secret critic?" Chloe glanced over. She saw Elena looking at the piano again, a distant look in her eyes. Chloe felt a flicker of irritation. This was her night, her spotlight. The maid's intense looking felt like an intrusion. "Maybe she's just never seen one before," Chloe said, her voice light and mocking. The friends around her giggled. Mark's eyes lit up with a cruel idea. "Hey, let's ask her," he said. "Ask her what?" The violinist friend said. "To play." Mark grinned. "Let's ask the maid to grace us with a tune." I bet she bangs out chopsticks like a pro. A wave of quiet laughter went through the group. It was the perfect prank. It would be awkward, funny, a little moment of shared superiority. It would break the monotony of their own, almost too perfect performances. Chloe hesitated for a second. She knew it was mean, but the laughter of her friends, the pressure to be part of the joke, was strong. And a part of her, a small, unkind part, wanted to put the staring maid back in her place, the place of a watcher, not a participant. "Okay," Chloe said, smiling a tight smile. "Let's do it." As Elena passed by again, her tray now laden with dirty glasses, Chloe called out, "Elena, a moment, please." Elena stopped and turned. Her posture was slightly stooped, as if used to making herself smaller. "Yes, Miss Chloe?" "We couldn't help but notice," Chloe said, her voice sweet and loud enough for others to hear. "You seem to really love the music. You're always watching the piano so closely." Elena's eyes flickered down to the floor. "It is a beautiful instrument, miss." "It is." Chloe agreed brightly. "So, we were thinking, since you appreciate it so much, why don't you play something for us?" "For the party?" The question hung in the air. A few nearby guests paused their conversations, overhearing. They looked from the polished teenagers to the maid in her apron, their faces curious, some amused. Alana looked stunned, as if she'd been gently slapped. Her knuckles tightened around the edge of the tray, turning white. "Oh, no. I could not." "Come on," Mark chimed in, his tone playful, but his eyes sharp. "Don't be shy. We're all friends here. We just want to share the joy of music." His words were a deliberate parody of encouragement. "I am not a player," Alana said, her voice firmer now, but quiet. She took a small step back, toward the kitchen, toward safety. "Just one little song?" Chloe pressed, the sweetness in her voice starting to harden at the edges. She was committed to the bit now. The audience was growing. It would be a fun addition to the party. "Please?" Elena looked from Chloe's expectant face to the smug faces of her friends. She looked at the interested stares of the guests. It was a request that was not a request. It was a test, a setup for humiliation. A deep flush crept up her neck. For a long moment, she said nothing. The only sound was the low hum of party chatter. Then, something changed in her. The submissive slump in her shoulders began to straighten, slowly, almost imperceptibly. The hand not holding the tray unclenched. The embarrassment in her eyes didn't vanish, but it was joined by something else, a spark of defiance, or maybe just a profound, weary resolve. She had spent years being invisible, but they had insisted on making her a spectacle. So be it. Without a word, she turned and walked toward the kitchen door. A wave of quiet giggles passed through Mark and his friends. They thought she was fleeing, but she wasn't. She pushed the kitchen door open, set her heavy tray silently on the counter inside, and then turned back. She walked out of the kitchen, leaving the world of dishes and trays behind. She walked past the smiling, waiting teenagers, her apron strings trailing slightly. She moved with a new deliberate calm toward the shining black piano. The living room fell completely silent. Every eye was on her. The shift was confusing. This wasn't the flustered retreat they expected. She stopped in front of the piano bench. She did not sit down immediately. She simply stood there, looking at the keys, as if greeting an old friend or confronting an old enemy. The room held its breath, waiting for the fumbling, the comical wrong note, the joke to complete itself. Elena closed her eyes for a brief second. When she opened them, the last trace of the meek maid was gone. Her face was a mask of intense, quiet focus. She slowly, gracefully, sat down on the bench. She adjusted its height slightly, a professional's small habit. She stretched her fingers' hands that were reddened from work, with short, practical nails. They hovered over the keys. Then she raised her right hand, and with a control that seemed to draw all the sound from the room, she pressed down on a single key. The note was a middle C, but it was not just a note. It was clear, round, and resonant. It was perfectly weighted, neither too hard nor too soft. It bloomed in the silent room and hung there, pure and undeniable, like a truth that had finally been spoken. That one simple note carried an authority that Chloe's entire Chopin piece had not. The smirk froze on Mark's face. Chloe's confident posture stiffened. The prank was over. Something else had begun, and before anyone could exhale, Elena's hands came down, and the room was filled with music that no one, absolutely no one, had been prepared for. The sound that came from the piano was not a tune anyone in the room recognized. It wasn't chopsticks. It wasn't some simple nursery rhyme dot. It was a wave. It started deep and low, a rumbling in the belly of the grand piano that you could feel in your feet through the marble floor. It was like thunder heard from a great distance. Then Elena's left hand moved, building chords that were heavy and complex, full of a sadness so deep it felt ancient. They were not the clean, bright chords of party music. They were the sound of a storm gathering. All the air seemed to leave the room. The polite, chatting guests fell completely still. A man who had been lifting a glass to his lips stopped, the rim hovering an inch from his mouth. The woman next to him had her hand frozen in mid-air, halfway to adjusting her necklace. Their faces, moments ago relaxed with wine and gossip, were now blank with shock. Chloe felt her own smile crack and fall away. She stood just a few feet from the piano, and the physical force of the music hit her first. This wasn't playing. This was commanding. She watched Elena's back. The maid's usual stoop was gone. Her spine was straight, her shoulders powerful and sure. Her head was bent slightly over the keys, not in submission, but in fierce concentration. Elena's hands were a blur. The red, work-worn hands that washed fine china and polished silver were now flying across the ivory. They leaped and crossed, her fingers striking with incredible strength, and then landing with a tenderness that made the next chord ache. The music swelled, filled with a longing that tightened chests all around the room. It would build to a crashing, powerful peak, and then suddenly fall away to a single pure melody line, so heartbreakingly beautiful that the violinist friend felt her own eyes sting with tears. She didn't understand why. Mark, the boy who had made the joke, took a step back as if pushed. The clever, mean smile was long gone. His face was pale. He looked at his friends, seeking the shared joke, but found only the same stunned confusion. This was impossible. This was a maid. She cleaned toilets. She couldn't create this. A cold knot of shame began to twist in his stomach. From the doorway leading to the study, Mr. Kensington appeared. He had been on a boring business call, his phone held to his ear. The music had pierced through the wall and the dull conversation. He had hung up without a word. Now he stood, gripping the doorframe, his eyes wide. He looked at the woman at his piano. He saw the transformed posture, the absolute mastery in her movements. He saw the faces of his guests not amused, but awed. This was no prank. This was a revelation. A strange feeling stirred in him, a mix of awe and a dawning, uncomfortable understanding. His wife, Mrs. Kensington, had a very different reaction. She had been in the kitchen, fussing about the canapes, when the music began. She walked out, a frown of annoyance on her face. Who had changed the music so loudly? Then she saw it was Elena. Her frown deepened into a scowl of disbelief, and tightened into something harder. This was wrong. This was not the order of things. The help was meant to serve the party, not to stop it, not to dominate it with this noisy foreign emotion. She took a step forward, instinct telling her to put a stop to this spectacle, but the sheer power of the performance held her back. She crossed her arms, her body rigid with disapproval. The music was telling a story without words. It spoke of vast, open spaces and a deep personal grief. It had wild dances in it, and moments of silence, so heavy you could hear the rustle of a dress as a guest shifted their weight. It was alive. Elena was gone. The woman at the piano was someone else entirely. Her eyes were fixed on some point, far beyond the wall of the Kensington house. She was not playing notes from memory. She was pulling them from a place inside her that had been locked away for a very long time. A place of joy and of immense pain. Her face, usually so carefully empty, was now a map of feeling. A slight wince at a particular mournful phrase. A tightening of her jaw as the music fought its way through a difficult passage. A fleeting, almost invisible softening when a tender melody emerged. She played for 7 minutes. In a normal party, 7 minutes is a long time. It is time for 3 conversations, a trip to the buffet, a joke told and laughed at. Here, 7 minutes was a lifetime. No one moved. No one whispered. They were prisoners of the beauty they had accidentally demanded. A man near the back, an older gentleman who was a patron of the city's symphony, felt his throat close up. He had heard this piece performed in great concert halls by famous pianists. He knew what he was hearing was not just good. It was world class. And it was coming from a woman in a maid's uniform in a suburban living room. The contradiction was so shocking it made his head spin. Finally, the music began its final journey. It built and built, layer upon layer of sound, a crashing storm of notes that seemed to shake the very crystals in the chandelier. Elena's whole body was involved now, leaning into the keys, demanding everything from the instrument. And then, with a series of deep, resounding chords that felt like fate itself knocking, it ended. The last note vibrated in the silent air dot, and then there was nothing, no clapping. No chatter. Just a thick, ringing silence. The normal world seemed too bright, too shallow, to return to. Elena's hand slowly lowered into her lap. The strength seemed to drain from her shoulders. She sat for a few seconds, head bowed, breathing slowly, coming back to herself. Back to the room. Back to the reality of where she was and what she had just done. She slowly stood up from the bench. The movement broke the spell in the worst way. It was a simple, familiar movement, a maid finishing a task. But the task had been this. She turned to face the room. Her face was pale, and the familiar, quiet mask was slipping back into place, but it was cracked. There was a vulnerability there now, an exposure that made her look terribly tired. She didn't look at Chloe or her friends. She didn't look at the stunned guests. Her eyes found a spot on the floor. Without a word, she walked. She walked past the frozen circle of teenagers. She walked through the crowd that parted silently for her, people shrinking back slightly as if her talent had made her suddenly radioactive. Her footsteps on the marble were the only sound. She pushed through the kitchen door and was gone. The kitchen door swung shut with a soft click. For another 5 seconds, the silence held. Then the room erupted not in applause, but in a frantic, hushed buzz. Everyone started talking at once, voices low and urgent. What in the world was that? That was unbelievable. Who is she? Did you know she could do that? Chloe felt her friends looking at her. Their expressions were no longer mocking. They were accusing. This was her house, her maid, her idea. She had turned their little joke into something that made them feel small and foolish. The violinist friend just shook her head slowly, looking at the now empty piano bench as if it were haunted. Mr. Kensington walked slowly into the center of the room. He looked at his daughter, saw the confusion and shame on her face. He looked toward the kitchen door. His practical, business-minded brain was trying to catch up. He had just witnessed a miracle, and he had paid for it with a monthly cleaning salary. The wrongness of it sat in his gut like a stone dot in the kitchen. Elena stood with her back against the cool refrigerator door. Her heart was pounding against her ribs. Her hands, which had felt so powerful moments ago, were now trembling. She clutched them together to make it stop. She could hear the muffled roar of conversation from the other room. She closed her eyes. She had not played that piece, Rachmaninoff's second, in over 20 years. She had sworn she never would again. It was too tied to before. To the grand hall and key, to the spotlight, to her teacher's proud smile, to her parents in the front row, to the life that was taken, not with a bang, but with the slow, grinding horror of war and loss that had forced her to flee, to disappear, to become no one. And now, a room full of strangers and a spoiled girl's cruel joke had dragged it all out of her. The ghost was out, and she had never felt more seen or more terribly alone. She listened to the buzz of the party that had now completely forgotten the reason it was thrown. She took a deep, shaky breath, smoothed down her apron, and reached for a dishcloth. There was still a sink full of glasses to wash. The silence in the kitchen was loud. Elena could hear the frantic, buzzing chatter from the living room right through the door. It sounded like a beehive that had been kicked. Her own breathing was too quick, too shallow. She pressed the cool, damp dishcloth to her forehead. The familiar smell of lemon soap was a small anchor dot she had to move. Standing still meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling the huge, hollow space that had opened up inside her. The music had torn it open. She forced her hands to stop shaking by picking up a champagne flute from the sink. She held it under the hot water, watching the bubbles and bits of lipstick swirl down the drain. The routine was a lifeline. Scrub, rinse, place on the drying rack. Again, dot in the living room. The party was broken. It couldn't get back to what it was. People clustered in small groups, all talking about the same thing, their voices a mixture of awe and gossip. Mr. Kensington knew he had to do something. He was the host. He clinked the spoon gently against his own wine glass. The sharp ting cut through the noise. People turned to look at him. "Friends," he said, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. "Thank you." That was an unexpected gift of music. He was searching for the right words, the businessman's words, to package the unexplainable. A remarkable talent we were. Fortunate to witness. He saw the look on his daughter's face, pale, confused, and felt a pang. "Please enjoy the rest of the evening." It was a dismissal. The guests took the hint. Slowly, people began to collect coats, to say quiet, hurried goodbyes. The congratulations for Chloe's prize were an afterthought now, mumbled quickly. The party was over, killed by a performance too beautiful to follow. Chloe's friends gathered around her near the grand piano, which now seemed to loom like a sleeping giant. "What?" Mark said, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. "Was that?" "I have no idea," Chloe whispered. She couldn't look at the piano. "She's just Elena. She cleans things." The violinist friend hugged her arms around herself. That was Ratch too. The second piano concerto. "I've only ever heard recordings. It's one of the hardest things ever written." She looked toward the kitchen door. No one just knows that. No one plays that unless they've lived it. Mr. Kensington approached them. His face was serious. "Chloe, a word, please." He led her away from her friends into his wood-paneled study and closed the door. The sound of the party was muffled here. "Dad, Explain," he said, not unkindly, but firmly. He sat behind his big desk, gesturing for her to sit in the leather chair opposite. He felt like he was in a business meeting where he'd just discovered a vital piece of information had been hidden from him. "It was a joke," Chloe said, her words tumbling out. "We saw her looking at the piano. Mark thought it would be funny to ask her to play. We thought she'd say no, or play something silly. We didn't know." She trailed off, helpless. "A joke," her father repeated. He leaned back, steepling his fingers. He looked at his daughter, seeing not a cruel teenager, but a scared one who had accidentally opened a door she couldn't close. "You asked our maid to perform for your amusement, and instead she gave a performance that I suspect was worth more than this house." He let that sink in. "Who is she, Chloe?" "I don't know. She's quiet. She does her work. She's from Europe somewhere, I think. Mom hired her." At that moment, Mrs. Kensington entered the study without knocking. Her cheeks were flushed, not from wine, but from irritation. "Well, that was certainly a spectacle," she said, her voice tight. "Completely derailed the evening. The Hendersons left without even trying the petty fours." "Mom, she was incredible," Chloe said, the words surprising her as she said them. "That's not the point." Mrs. Kensington snapped. "It was inappropriate. It was showing off. It made everyone uncomfortable. And it was our piano. She should have known her place." Mr. Kensington stared at his wife. "Her place?" he said slowly. "Her place? Did you hear what we all just heard? That wasn't showing off, Margaret. That was a cry from the soul. That woman isn't just a maid. Then what is she?" Mrs. Kensington challenged, putting her hands on her hips. "A concert pianist who enjoys scrubbing our floors. Don't be ridiculous. She probably took some lessons as a child and memorized one fancy piece to get attention." A cold clarity settled over Mr. Kensington, his wife's willful blindness, his daughter's ignorant prank, his own comfortable ignorance. It all suddenly seemed ugly. He stood up. "We're going to find out." He walked out of the study, through the now empty living room where the last few guests were being seen out by a confused caterer, and pushed through the kitchen door. Elena was at the sink, up to her elbows in soapy water. She didn't turn around. "Elena," Mr. Kensington said. She kept scrubbing the pot. "The guests are gone? I will finish here and start on the living room." "Forget the living room," he said. His tone was not angry, but it was direct. It was the tone he used in important meetings. "Please, sit down." Slowly, she rinsed her hands and dried them on her apron. She turned, but didn't sit. She stood by the kitchen table, waiting. "What?" Mr. Kensington asked, choosing his words with care. "Was that piece of music?" Elena looked at a point on the wall behind him. "It is Rachmaninoff. The second concerto. The first movement. It was breathtaking," he said, and meant it. "Where did you learn to play like that?" There was a long pause. The hum of the refrigerator filled the kitchen. "A long time ago," she said finally. "In another life." Chloe had followed her father and stood in the doorway, listening. Her mother stood behind her, arms still crossed. "We need to understand, Elena," Mr. Kensington said gently. "You live in our home. You care for our things. And we clearly know nothing about you. Please, your full name." Elena closed her eyes for a second. The fight seemed to go out of her. The secret was too big to hold now. It was out in the music, and now it had to come out in words. "Elena," she said softly. Then she added her family name. It was a name with too many consonants, a name that felt heavy and foreign on the sleek, modern kitchen air. "Elena Vlasenko." Mr. Kensington nodded. "Thank you." He turned and left the kitchen, going back to his study. Chloe and her mother watched him go, then looked at Elena, who had turned back to the sink. In his study, Mr. Kensington sat at his computer. He typed the name into a search engine. Elena Vlasenko pianist. The results came up. Not many. They were old. Articles from music magazines and newspapers in a language he couldn't read, but the dates were from over 20 years ago. He clicked on Translate this page. His heart began to beat faster. There were photographs. Black and white, grainy from being scanned. A young girl, maybe 16, with intense, dark eyes and hair in a braid, sitting at a massive piano on a big stage. The caption called her a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent. He scrolled. More articles. Reviews of a debut with a national orchestra. Talk of a bright future. Tours planned. Then the article stopped. Abruptly. The last one was not a review. It was a short news item. His eyes scanned the translated text. Tragedy at the home of... Following the political unrest. Confirmed deceased. Whereabouts of the daughter, Elena, are unknown. He leaned back, his hand over his mouth. He felt cold. The pieces clicked together with a dreadful finality. The immense sorrow in the music. The hiding. The quiet, invisible life. She wasn't a maid who could play piano. She was a pianist who had become a maid to survive. He walked back to the kitchen. His wife and daughter were still there, standing awkwardly. Elena was wiping the counters down, her movements mechanical. He didn't know how to say it, so he just said it plain. I looked up your name. Elena's hand stopped mid-wipe. She went very still. You were famous, Mr. Kensington said, his voice thick. A prodigy. In Ukraine. He saw Chloe's eyes widen. And then there was trouble. Your family? He couldn't finish the sentence. Elena slowly placed the cloth on the counter. She didn't cry. Her face was like stone, but her eyes were oceans of pain. Yes, was all she said. One word that held a world of loss. Why didn't you ever say anything? Mrs. Kensington asked, but her voice had lost its edge. It was just confused. Elena looked at her, and for the first time, there was no servant's deference in her gaze. It was just exhaustion. To say what? That I used to be someone? That the life you pay me to clean is the life I ran from? There is no point. That person is gone. The music was gone. Until tonight. She looked at Chloe, and the girl flinched. You asked for a joke. That music is not a joke. It is all I had left of them, of my home. And you made me play it for a laugh. Chloe felt the words like physical blows. Her face crumpled. I'm sorry, she whispered, the first real apology of her life. I didn't know. I know you didn't, Elena said. Her anger was gone as quickly as it came, replaced by that deep, endless tiredness. No one here knows anything. She untied her apron. She folded it neatly and laid it on the clean kitchen table. I will go to my room now. The living room. I will clean it in the morning. She walked out of the kitchen, past the 3 speechless members of the family who now, finally, saw the ghost they had been housing for years, upstairs. In her small, plain room, Elena sat on the edge of her narrow bed. She looked at her hands. They still trembled slightly. Downstairs, a grand piano sat silent in the dark living room, a sleeping beast once more. But something had changed. The ghost was no longer just inside her. It was in the house now, and The morning after the party was a strange, heavy quiet. The grand house felt different. It wasn't just the mess of empty glasses and discarded napkins. It was as if the air itself had been changed by the music and was now holding its breath. Chloe came downstairs early. She hadn't slept much. The sounds of the piano kept playing in her head, mixing with the look on Alana's face when she had said, "You made me play it for a laugh." She walked into the living room. Sunlight streamed in, hitting the piano's lid. It was just an object again, expensive and beautiful, but lifeless. She couldn't imagine touching it. She found Elena already in the kitchen, wearing her regular clothes, a simple gray dress, not her uniform. She was making tea, moving with the same quiet efficiency as always. But everything felt different. Chloe hesitated in the doorway. "Good morning," Chloe said, her voice small. Elena glanced at her. "Morning," she said. Her tone wasn't friendly or unfriendly. It was neutral, like she was speaking to a stranger in a store. I wanted to say again, "I'm sorry." It was a stupid, mean thing to do. The words felt clumsy and too late. Elena poured hot water into a cup. "It is done," she said simply. She didn't accept the apology. She didn't reject it. She just stated a fact. The event was now a piece of the past, sitting between them. Chloe didn't know what to do with that. "Can I help with the cleanup?" "That is not your job," Elena said. She took her tea and walked past Chloe, heading for the living room to begin the work. Breakfast was awkward. The family sat at the long dining table. The usual sounds of clinking cutlery were too loud. Mrs. Kensington broke the silence. "I've been thinking," she said, stirring her yogurt. "What happened last night was very disruptive. But it's given us a situation to manage." She spoke as if it were a problem with the plumbing. "Clearly, Elena has abilities. But we must remember, she is still an employee. We can't have the household dynamic appended." Mr. Kensington put down his newspaper. "Manage? Margaret, we're not managing a situation. We discovered a human being living in our house." "That's overly dramatic," Mrs. Kensington said with a tight smile. "She has a tragic past, yes. But she chose to keep it secret. She chose to work here. We've given her a good, stable life. Last night was an emotional outburst. We should all just move on and let things return to normal." "Normal?" Mr. Kensington said, his voice rising. "You heard what I found. Her family was killed. She lost everything. Her career, her home, her entire world. And we pay her to scrub our floors. And you want normal? The normal where we pretend we didn't hear a masterpiece in our own living room? The normal where we ignore that we've been treating a world-class artist like furniture?" Chloe stared at her plate. Her father's words made her skin crawl with shame. "Don't raise your voice," Mrs. Kensington said coldly. "We provided her with a job when she needed one. That was a kindness. She should be grateful, not making scenes that embarrass us." The word grateful hung in the air like a bad smell. Mr. Kensington pushed his chair back. "I can't listen to this," he said, his voice low with a kind of anger Chloe had never heard before. It wasn't loud. It was deep and disappointed. He walked out. He didn't go to his study. He went to find Elena. She was in the living room, carefully collecting crystal glasses onto a tray. She didn't look up. "Elena," he said, "please, stop for a moment." She paused, holding a glass. "I need to speak with you, not as your employer, just as a person who is ashamed." She set the glass down and turned to look at him, waiting. "My wife," he began, then shook his head. "No, I have been blind. We have all been blind. To have you here with such a gift, such a history, and to have never seen it. Last night wasn't just music. It was a testament to survival, to talent, and we asked for it as a joke." He took a deep breath. "I cannot apologize enough for that. But an apology is not enough." Elena's expression was guarded. "What is enough?" "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "But I want to try. That piece you played, it needs to be heard. Not in a living room for a joke. It needs an audience that understands. Elena gave a small, sad shake of her head. That life is gone. The stage is gone. The audience is gone. It doesn't have to be, he said, an idea forming. He was a businessman. He solved problems. This was the biggest problem he had ever faced. I have connections. I sit on the board of the city's music conservatory. They have practice rooms. Beautiful pianos. Better than this one. They are empty in the evenings. He spoke quickly, not as an order, but as an offer. You could go. Anytime. No one would bother you. You could just play. For yourself. If you wanted. For the first time that morning, a real flicker of emotion crossed Elena's face. Not anger or sadness, but a faint, fragile spark of hope, quickly hidden. The thought of a piano, a real piano in a quiet room, with no one watching. It was a powerful lure. That is, a kind thought, she said carefully. It's not charity, he insisted. It's the opposite. It's paying a debt we didn't even know we owed. She looked at him for a long moment, seeing the genuine struggle in his face. She gave a single, slow nod. I will think about it. That was all he could ask for. Later that afternoon, the real confrontation happened. Mrs. Kensington found Elena polishing the dining table. Elena, we need to have a talk about boundaries, she began, her voice crisp. Elena straightened up, the polishing cloth in her hand. She said nothing. The party last night was for my daughter. You diverted attention in a very inappropriate way. In the future, if you are asked to perform, a simple no will suffice. We must maintain a professional relationship. Elena listened. Then she spoke, and her voice was quiet, but clear as ice. You asked me to perform to make your daughter's friends laugh. To mock me. There was nothing professional about that request. Mrs. Kensington blinked, taken aback. It was a bit of fun. You're taking it too personally. My life, Elena said, each word precise, is not a bit of fun. My past is not a party trick. The music I played, that was my family. That was my country. That was everything I lost. She took a step forward, not threateningly, but with a dignity that made Mrs. Kensington step back. You want to talk about professional? A professional is paid for their skill. You pay me to clean. You paid nothing for the music. You got it for free, with a joke. So who is not being professional? Mrs. Kensington's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The simple, undeniable truth of it left her speechless. I will clean your house, Elena continued, her gaze steady. That is my job. But I am not just the maid. You know that now. You cannot unknow it. So things cannot go back to normal. Your normal was me being invisible. I am not invisible anymore. She turned and walked away, leaving Mrs. Kensington standing alone in the sunlit dining room. The smell of lemon polish in the air. Upstairs, Chloe had been practicing a sonata in the small music room, but her heart wasn't in it. The notes felt empty and childish. She stopped and went to the window. She saw her father in the garden, talking on his phone, gesturing seriously. She saw her mother come out of the house and sit stiffly on a bench, alone. She thought about the conservatory. She was a student there. The thought of Elena being there, in those hallways near those practice rooms. It was terrifying and thrilling. She gathered her courage and went to the small, separate entrance that led to Elena's room. She knocked softly. After a moment, the door opened. Elena looked at her, expectant. Hi, Chloe said, her throat dry. My dad. He told me about the conservatory idea. I go there. I have a practice room booked tomorrow after my theory class. Room 4B. It has a really good Steinway. She swallowed. I won't be using it. It's empty from 4 to 6 p.m., The key code is 0914. She recited the numbers. If you wanted to see, no one would know it was you. She wasn't offering pity. She was offering a key. A very small, specific key to a door. Elena studied the girl's face. She saw the shame, but also a real, awkward effort. It was a different kind of offer from her father's. This one came with no audience, no board members, no expectations. Just a room and a piano and silence. Room 4B, Elena repeated. 0914. Chloe nodded. Yeah. Then she turned and walked quickly away. Her heart pounding. Elena closed the door. She leaned against it, looking at the bare walls of her small room. For years, her world had been this room, the kitchen, the living room, the endless cycle of cleaning. Now, someone had just drawn a map to a different world. A world of pianos and old memories. She looked at her hands. They were no longer trembling. She closed them into fists, then slowly opened them. The ghost was out. But maybe, just maybe, it didn't have to be a ghost of pure pain. Maybe it could remember what it was like to play, not from a place of loss, but just to play. She walked to her small dresser and took out a single old photograph she kept tucked in a book. A faded picture of a younger her, standing between two smiling people in front of a large, ornate building. She touched their faces lightly. Maybe, she whispered to the silence. The day was gray and soft with drizzle. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Elena went through her morning tasks at the Kensington house as usual. She vacuumed the living room, the memory of the party quiet under the hum of the machine. She wiped down the grand piano, her fingers brushing the cool, smooth wood. It was just a piece of furniture again, a part of her job, but something inside her had shifted. It was a quiet, restless feeling, like a bird that had remembered it had wings, even if it had forgotten how to fly. In the afternoon, she told Mrs. Kensington she had an errand to run. Mrs. Kensington just nodded, her manner still cool and formal. The house felt like it was divided into two separate worlds now, existing side by side, but barely touching. Elena took the bus. She hadn't been to this part of the city in years. The conservatory was a grand old stone building with tall windows. Students hurried in and out, carrying instrument cases, their chatter full of music theory and gossip. They paid no attention to the middle-aged woman in the plain coat walking through the heavy doors. Her heart beat a little faster. The air inside smelled like old wood, rosin, and possibility. It was a smell from her childhood, from before. She followed the signs, her footsteps quiet on the polished floors. Practice room 4B was on the 4th floor, at the end of a quiet hallway. She stood before the door. The keypad glowed softly. She punched in the 4 numbers Chloe had given her. 0914. There was a soft click. She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. It was a small, simple room. Soundproofed walls, a window looking out over rainy rooftops, a chair, and a piano. It was a Steinway grand, smaller than the Kensingtons, but it had a serious, professional look. The lid was closed. The room was utterly, profoundly silent. Elena closed the door behind her. The silence wrapped around her. This was different. This wasn't a performance. There was no one to mock, no one to impress, no one to hide from. It was just her and the instrument. For a long time, she just stood there. She was afraid. Afraid that the magic of that night at the party was a fluke. Afraid that the connection was broken, that the years of silence had rusted the pathway from her heart to her hands. Afraid that when she touched the keys, only the ghost would be there and not the music. Slowly, she took off her coat and laid it over the chair. She walked to the piano and opened the lid. The rows of black and white keys stared back, waiting. She didn't sit. She reached out one finger and pressed a single key, just like she had that night. A clear, right a note hung in the quiet room. It was a good tone. Pure, honest dot. She pulled the stool closer and sat down. She placed her hands in her lap, looking at them. Then, very slowly, she brought them up and rested her fingers lightly on the keys. She didn't play Rachmaninoff. That was too big, too raw. It belonged to the storm of the other night. Instead, she began with scales. Simple, oaring, fundamental scales. Up and down. Her fingers were stiff at first, uncertain. She made mistakes. She hit a wrong note and winced. It had been so long. But she kept going. The muscle memory, buried deep under years of cleaning and hiding, began to whisper back. She moved from scales to a simple batch prelude. It was clean, mathematical, like rebuilding a foundation stone by stone. The notes were hesitant at first, but as she played a passage a second time, a third time, they began to smooth out. They began to flow dot. She lost track of time. The gray light from the window began to fade. She moved from batch to a Chopin nocturne, a piece of gentle nighttime sadness. This time, she didn't just play the notes. She began to feel them. The music was no longer just a memory of loss. It became a living thing in the room, a gentle companion to her own loneliness. She didn't cry. She just played. And for the first time in 20 years, she played not for an audience, not for a memory, not out of pain or defiance. She played for the quiet joy of the sound itself. She played because it was a part of her that had been sleeping, and it was finally, tentatively, waking up. Asterisk, 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 downstairs, Chloe was in the library, pretending to study. She kept glancing at the clock. 4:30, 5 o'clock. Her father had found her earlier. "Did you give her the code?" he asked quietly. Chloe nodded. "Do you think she'll go?" "I don't know," he said. "I hope so." Now, Chloe couldn't stand it. She had to know. She left the library and walked up the 4 flights of stairs, her steps slowing as she neared room 4B. She didn't want to intrude. She just wanted to know if the room was empty, or if she heard it. Not the thunder of Rachmaninoff, but something else. The clear, delicate notes of a Chopin nocturne seeping softly through the soundproof door. It was beautiful. It was practiced. It was alive. Chloe leaned her back against the wall opposite the door and slid down to sit on the floor. She hugged her knees to her chest and just listened. This wasn't the shocking, powerful performance of the party. This was something more private, more real. This was the sound of someone remembering who they were. She listened until the music inside stopped. A few minutes of silence passed. Then the door opened. Elena stepped out, pulling on her coat. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear. She saw Chloe sitting on the floor and stopped, surprised. Chloe scrambled to her feet, her face flushing. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I wanted to make sure the room was okay." Elena looked at her for a moment. Then she said, "The piano is very good." "Thank you." "You're welcome," Chloe said. An awkward silence hung between them. Was it okay to play again? Elena considered the question. She thought of the stiffness in her fingers slowly melting away. She thought of the quiet in the room. "It was not okay," she said finally. Chloe's face fell. It was necessary. She began to walk down the hall, and Chloe fell into step beside her, not sure why. "You're playing," Chloe said hesitantly as they walked down the stairs. "At the party." It made my playing feel stupid, like just pushing buttons. Elena didn't look at her. "Technique is buttons," she said. "Feeling is what you say with them. You have good buttons." Now you must find something to say. It was the first time Elena had ever said anything to her about music. It wasn't praise. It wasn't criticism. It was just a truth, plain and simple. When they reached the main floor, Mr. Kensington was there, as if by coincidence. He was looking at a poster for a visiting orchestra. He turned and saw them. "Elena," he said, nodding. "I hope the facilities were adequate." "They were," she said. "Thank you." "There's something else," he said. He looked a little nervous, like a man about to propose a risky business deal. "The conservatory. They have a program. A weekly masterclass for advanced community students. Not children, adults. The teacher is a retired professor, a very kind man. He heard about, well, someone mentioned an extraordinary player was in the city. He hurried on before she could refuse. No pressure, no performance. Just a small group, working on pieces. A space to play and talk about music. As equals, he held out a simple white card with a time and a room number. "Next Thursday, 7 p.m., if you want." Elena took the card. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just put it in her pocket. Asterisk, 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 weeks passed. The Kensington house found a new, fragile rhythm. Elena still cleaned. She still made meals. But the silence around her was different. It was no longer the silence of invisibility. It was a respectful quiet, a space they all gave her. She went back to room 4B. Often, sometimes Chloe would hear her coming back and would sometimes be brave enough to ask, "How was it?" And sometimes Elena would give a small, almost smile and say, "The trills in the third movement are still rusty." One Thursday evening, Elena put on her best plain dress. She looked at the white card on her dresser. She picked it up, put it down, then picked it up again. She left the house and walked into the deepening evening dot. She found the room. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, she could see a few people, different ages, gathered around a piano. She heard someone playing a difficult passage, stumbling, then trying again. She heard a gentle, old voice offering advice. She stood in the hallway, her heart pounding just as it had the night of the party. But this was a different kind of fear. This wasn't fear of mockery. It was the fear of connection. The fear of stepping back into the world. From inside, the old professor said, let's take a break. Who's next? Elena looked at the card in her hand. She thought of the silent, safe practice room. She thought of the grand piano in the living room, now just a piece of furniture she dusted. She thought of the music that was slowly waking up inside her, no longer just a ghost of the past, but a quiet, present voice. She took a deep, steadying breath. She didn't go in. Not that night. But she didn't walk away either. She stood there, listening to the sounds of people who loved music. And for the first time, she felt not like a lost relic, but like someone standing at the edge of a door that was, finally, open. Back at the house, Chloe was practicing. She was working on a new piece, one with more emotion than she was used to. She was struggling. She heard the front door open and close softly. Later, from the kitchen, she heard it. Not the grand piano, but the small old upright that was seldom used in the sitting room. A simple melody, a folk tune, warm and sad and sweet. It was Elena, playing something from her home, not for anyone, just for the sake of the song itself. Chloe stopped playing. She just listened. And in that moment, she didn't hear a maid or a prodigy or a tragic figure. She just heard a neighbor in the young.